Happy Wednesday and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Rocketeer Minute, where each and every day, Monday through Friday, we go over 1 minute of the greatest adventure movie Walt Disney's ever made, the 1991 Joe Johnston-directed feature, The Rocketeer. I'm one of your hosts, Jim O'Kane of TVDads.com.
And I'm Hal Bryan, an airplane nerd from the Experimental Aircraft Association here in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Now, Jim, in tonight's minute, this is minute, where did it go? Minute number 53. And really the one who steals the show in this minute is an actor by the name of Bob Lehman. But he is not he's not playing just anyone. He's giving the scene a sense of realism by portraying none other than the legendary W.C. Fields. So when we talked about who we might bring on the show, you just woke up one day and decided, why not ask W.C. Fields' grandson? And sure enough, he said yes. So what a pleasure it is to welcome Ronald J. Fields. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Hal. I appreciate that. And Jim, and you can just call me Ron. Ronald J. Fields is on the cover of my books. That's how you have to look me up. But Ron is fine.
Well, Ron it is. And right out of the gate here, when Bob shows up, Neville Sinclair, played by Timothy Dalton, just says, "Hello, Bill." Is that generally how he was known?
Yes. In fact, his friends used to call him Uncle Bill.
Oh, that's great.
And his friends are John Barrymore and Will Fowler and Gene Fowler, I'm sorry, and a gang of those guys. And they used to hang around together on Bundy Boulevard in Los Angeles, and they called them the Bundy Bunch. The
Bundy Bunch. Absolute Hollywood legends right there.
Yeah.
Wow. And this being October of 1938, this would be about the peak of his film career, wouldn't it? I mean, I'm not sure where this lays in his filmography. This would be after The Bank Dick?
No, The Bank Dick was in 40. He was making the big broadcast of 1938.
Oh, okay.
Where, interestingly enough, I think it's interesting. That's where Bob Hope did his first feature film. And in that film, he sings to Dorothy Lamour, "Thanks for the Memories."
Wow.
His theme song. So, yeah, that was a W.C. Fields starring film.
It's amazing to me because I've known who W.C. Fields is my entire life. And still, I don't know how many times I've, in 49 years, I've sat down and sort of watched a film of his start to finish. But he's just part of the cultural fabric. And I would, even as a little kid, I would recognize when a cartoon character was sort of imitating him or based on him. And he must be, in addition to having such an impact as a performer, he must be among the most sort of imitated people in history, certainly in the first half of the 20th century.
I think he's imitated more than I am, that's for sure. But
probably more than the three of us put together.
I know,
just going to guess.
Hazard a guess. The interesting thing about that, the librarian of the Library of Congress, the librarian for the Library of Congress, literally said to my sister, with as my sister writes, with near tears in his eyes, that W.C. Fields is an icon of American culture and humor. Wow. So, and you're right on that. There's something there's something so unique about his humor, and it's so American. I mean, it's American family, and I think that's one of the reasons why he's sustained. The problem is, I think, he's not as well known among a younger generation, and I think the reason being is with trying to get your phone to go as fast as it possibly can, and WC's so laconic in his delivery, that it sometimes it misses. And you've got to think, he's not an easy comedian there's no slapstick or rare slapstick with him. He's a thoughtful comedian. It was a woman who drove me to drink, and I never had the decency to thank her.
Yeah, all of his sotto voce asides and things. I had a little bit different upbringing from Hal. My dad was a W.C. Fields maven. He loved Fields. To this day, when I go into the produce section of a supermarket and I see the word spelled Kumquats,
Yes.
I have to go, no, it's Cumquats, quats.
Is that two quats?
No, one quat. Yeah, and I am not joking about this. For many years, my pseudonym online was Carl Lafong, capital L, small a, capital F, small O, small N, small J, and I but if I did know Carl Lafong, I wouldn't admit it. But all of these, I'm sure you have these bits quoted to you all the time. And one of the things we were wondering about, we had Eric Lindbergh on several weeks ago. Eric Lindbergh, the grandson of Charles Lindbergh.
Wow.
And I had asked him what it was like growing up Lindbergh, and he said, he had a kind of a responsibility to be an explorer, be an innovator, and it's almost a burden for not a burden, but it was something to reach for. And I was just wondering, you grew up Fields. How did that? I would imagine that a lot of people came up to you and did impersonations of your grandfather a lot.
Not at all. And you may get a kick out of the story, particularly talking about It's a Gift. W.C. Fields' movies, It's a Gift, where Carl Lafong and all that stuff appears. I was about 12 years old. I was the youngest of 5 children, and my father would let us stay up late. Now, my father looked a lot like W.C., except for the nose, because my father was a teetotaler. One day I'm watching It's a Gift. It's a nighttime, and I'm about 12. It's nighttime, and I am laughing so hard at the Mr. Muckle scene in the drugstore that I have to leave the room because I can't breathe. I just couldn't breathe. And so my sister was quite concerned about me. My sister Harriet, Dr. Harriet Fields, was quite concerned about me. And she came out and are you okay? I was bending over. I said, yeah, that. And I said, that guy's got to be the funniest guy who ever lived. And she goes, what? I go, this guy, he's got to be the funniest guy who ever lived. And she says to me, you don't know, do you? Know what? He's your grandfather.
Wow.
So I did not know, but that explained why I had so many friends, I guess. But I did not know until I was later. And there were a couple of reasons for that. One, there were no photographs in the household. My father and my grandmother, Hattie, they were estranged from WC. They didn't want to, kind of remember WC. So we had no photographs. And for that matter, we had no photographs of my mother's side of the family. But that I can't explain. But but in any event, so there was nothing around the house to kind of say, hey, you're related to this guy. Plus, being the youngest, I honestly think the rest of the family just forgot to tell me. There was just, or they figured, how slow can you be? Now, the interesting thing, what you said about Lindbergh, is I ended up writing comedy. I ended up writing for Paramount and for Marblehead Manor and for Michael Richards and for and I did Night Court script and the interesting thing about that is when I interviewed Adele, WC's sister, she said we never thought Bill was that funny. And Walter was a funny guy. He was the funny guy.
Really?
Walter was WC's younger brother. Well, that's the same thing in my family. My brother Alan's a funny guy, but I ended up writing comedy, on a professional basis. And so I think it's kind of in the family. My daughter and my sons, they're very hilarious. I think it's in the blood.
Wow.
So
the thing with your grandfather is that he had so much talent, and I mean he had, from what I've understood in reading biographies of him, he had kind of a hard upbringing and relationship with his dad and stuff, and got into show business just as kind of an escape, and was an early major talent in the vaudeville circuit, and then later into films.
Now listen to this talent, this incredible talent this guy had, and he was oozing with it. I have a talent to write. That's all I have. I can't do anything else. But WC started out as a juggler. By the time he's 20, he's billed in the Keith Orpheum circuit as a world's greatest juggler, greatest comic juggler. He goes to the various venues where he plays, and he draws caricatures of the cast so he can sell them to the newspapers. He's that talented in drawing.
Wow. And
then you take it another step. He wrote most of his scripts, most of his stuff, almost all of his routines, and then he performs in them. So he's so multi-talented. To find all this stuff out was just amazing.
It was the beginning of Hollywood and things like that, and then he made the transfer from silence to talkies and developed his persona, his on-screen persona, and then later working that into radio, with Charlie McCarthy and things like that. It's just amazing that he built this little empire of W.C. Fields around him. It's stunning.
Well, yeah, it is. I think it quite is. And when my grandmother died, Hattie, W.C.'s wife, when she died in 1963, we went to her house in Beverly Hills, and in the basement of the house, we found scrapbooks that date back to 1898 when he first left Philly to go to Atlantic City to perform with the Atlantic City Pier. There he meets Hattie in 1898. They fall in love. He puts him into his act. In 1900, they're in the Keith Orpheum circuit, and they get married in San Francisco, and they travel the world. And in 1900, WC is only 20 years old.
Yeah.
So when I found this material, which we just donated recently, the last 10 years, to the American Motion Pictures of Arts and Sciences. They say it's one of the biggest collections they ever had. Well, W.C. and Hattie kept everything. And so with all this talent that you and I and Hal are talking about, with all this talent, I think he was very insecure. And so he kept clippings, and he kept notes, and he kept playbooks, and he kept everything where his name is mentioned. And I think it was, this is my theory, I'm no psychologist, I was an English major, that he just wanted to prove that one time he was once famous. That's the only thing I could think of.
Wow.
Well, yeah, I did read articles about your kind donation to the Academy Archives, which
I said the Academy of Motion Pictures.
I've done research with them in the past, and I've seen their archiving techniques, and I don't think you could find a better place for it.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think so either.
Yeah, no, they're a great resource for anybody interested in the history of movies and entertainment in general. It's stunning, but I find it fascinating that your family just wasn't that big on, or at least letting you know about where you come from. Has it affected? I mean, I guess it's affected your life in terms that you've become your grandfather's sort of official biographer.
Well, yes, and that affected that of course has an effect, and it's all by accident. I still wanted to write the Great American Novel when I was 22, and my agent convinced me to do a W.C. Fields book. Well, my father had died in '71, and so I going through his artifacts, I found that he had already started a book. So I said to my mother, what I'm going to probably do is write a book, let my father, let Pa leave a legacy, and I'll finish it for him. He had 9 pages. I did 500 something, but
wow.
He's in there though. That's good.
Yeah, and it's dedicated to him, and that's how I got to the first book. So then the next thing happens, I go back to my novel, and the next thing happens, some guy just barrages me at a party in Hollywood. What would you do next? And I said, probably I'd write a play. I've never written a play before. So he gave me an offer I couldn't say no to, and so I wrote a play that traveled around the country for about 5 years. It was a 1-man, 2-man show called W.C. Fields 100 Proof. Then I said, I'm going back to my novel. And then occurrences in my life happened. I needed money, and my agent said, well, do a second book. So I got a second book. And so it's just like one succession of things after the other. And I will tell you honestly, to this day, I have not gone about more than 10 pages on that novel.
Someday, though.
Someday.
Wow. There's so much. My growing up with my dad's love of Fields, I think of so many bits and skits, and there's so many phrases that I use from when I was a kid, from just watching his things. I did notice that there seems to have been, I think in the age of VHS and DVD, when on the re-releases and stuff, when they start coming up with compilation things, it seems like a lot of the Fields material gets adulterated. I mean, it kind of they drop in like comedy soundtracks over the top of the original movies and things, and I I feel like a lot of the Fields timing gets lost, and I kind of feel sad about that because it's like it seems to be repackaged to make it more palatable to a modern audience. But there's so much in the original Fields that it makes me sad when I see and I see it on things like TCM and stuff, or that they show the kind of the edited or overlaid version of your grandfather's work.
That will happen, and what happened is during the 70s, there were a lot of film pirates during this period, and they would change things in order. For instance, there was a guy named Raymond Rohauer, and he would change the music and then re-copyright The Dentist or The Fatal Glass of Beer, or one of W.C. Fields' shorts. And then if anyone showed him, he'd claim, "Here's my copyright, I own that." And so that's why a lot of that happened, was just simply to change the copyright.
Interesting.
Wow. Yeah. So it's a nasty business out there. I know, I'm in it.
And Jim mentioned a couple minutes ago about WC's work in radio later in his career, and it's amazing to me. I mean, a couple things. First of all, I'm always amazed that Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy were a hit on radio. When you think about a ventriloquist on radio, that there's something fundamental about that. That just almost why should that even work? Because you don't care if his lips are moving or not. But but of course it was all the wit in the writing.
Yeah, there's a reason for that, Hal. He was a lousy ventriloquist.
That's what I've always heard. But he was so good with the character, right? The character and the voice and everything else.
He had everything, just what you said. But he moved his lips, and right. So that's why he's so good on radio. But the funny thing is that Constance Moore told me a story. She was in I think The Bank Dick, but I can't recall right offhand. But she told me the story of that they were all sitting around going over the script, and no, it had to be. That's right. I'm sorry, it had to be Can't Cheat an Honest Man in 38 or 30 around there. Anyway, so he's Charlie McCarthy's mouthing off. Well, it turns out Bergen was the character that he was. He was very straight-laced. He was from an English background. And McCarthy was his alter ego. So he would never say anything. Bergen would never say anything bad, but McCarthy would. McCarthy was. And it was so funny. They said they're sitting around in a script conference before the show, and McCarthy's mouthing off, and Bergen saying, "Stop it," because McCarthy had his own chair. So Fields says, "Get him, McCarthy, you're out of here. Get him out of here." And Constance Moore said he wasn't confused, but he realized what Bergen was doing. He says, the rest of us, she told me, I once went up to Charlie McCarthy and slapped him across the face.
His little wooden face.
I know, that's right.
Isn't that amazing? But then the two of them together, I've heard a little bit of the sort of insult comedy stuff that they would do, and that is, to this day, this is, 70, almost 80 years later, it's still hilarious. Them going back and forth and picking at each other. And it's amazing to me. You think about, again, we're talking about W.C. Fields as this cultural icon, as this person that everybody knows. Even he's so distinctive. His personality is so larger than life that, I consider him a talented actor, but still, when you see him on screen, it's boom, there's W.C. Fields. He's bigger than a character. He's bigger than the picture. And then even working in radio, as soon as you hear his voice, you know immediately who it is, and you know what you're getting, and you're glad of it because you know this is going to be hysterical, and you're going to let him get away with just about anything and still love the guy.
Yeah, that's true. And what W.C. once said, his own quote was, "Anyone will forgive a rogue as long as there's one bit of human kindness in his rogueries." So, he was that much aware of the human existence, that much, onto this is going to work because I'm going to show I'm sweet. So he steals cigars, he steals hot dogs, but he's the father of Poppy, and he treats her with this human kindness of an amazing, touching way, and then moves on. So he does all his rogueries. For instance, the end of Poppy is a very funny story. He grabs her. Poppy's found her new love and her new town and her real family and all the stuff that she's been looking for throughout her life. And W.C. was her ersatz father. And as he leaves this mansion where she's going to stay and go back on the road as a performer, he grabs her by the shoulders as tenderly as you can even imagine, and he says, "Let me give you one word of fatherly advice. Never give a sucker an even break." Turns around, sees a humidor filled with cigars, grabs all the cigars, picks them in his pocket, and walks out.
That is fantastic.
He was incredible that way. He actually made you love the rogue.
Yeah, he really did.
You never felt that he was on top of things through most of stuff. I mean, typically it was henpecked, and he would just look for. His character seemed to look for angles to get ahead. I can't remember the name of I can't remember the movie, but it's the one where he's telling a story about snakes, and he finds out that one of the women listening to the story is terrified of snakes. Yeah. So he adds more to the story with the snake, and she just keeps fainting and screaming.
That is You Can't Cheat an Honest Man as well.
Yeah.
And they're at the party, and they
they get back, and he's talking about that they were climbing over mountains and streams, and they had a goat with them, and the goat disappeared, and somebody finally asks him, "Well, what happened to the goat?" And he said, "Well, it was very good with mustard."
Yeah. That's never give a second to even break. What's funny about these things, and most of his movies, not all, most of his movies, he wants to succeed. He has the Bissonnette grocery store. He sells it to buy an orange ranch. It comes out to be a huge failure, and by hook and a crook, by luck, he becomes very rich. But he never changes.
Yeah.
The wealth does not change him. So that is sweet, man.
There's so many quotations out there attributed to him, and I'm sure over the years some of them become a little bit apocryphal. But you were talking about snakes. I was just thinking of one. I know I'm going to get this a little bit wrong, but it's something like, always carry a bottle of whiskey in case of snake bite, and furthermore, always carry a small snake.
That's right. Yeah.
Just how lovable that was.
I know.
Oh gosh, and just mentioning Mr. Bissonnette, I can remember my dad saying, "No, it's not Bissonnette, it's Bissonnette." Never call me Mr. Bissonnette in front of Mrs. Bissonnette. There's just so.
I got to tell you a very funny story. Well, I think it's funny. I always have to make that qualification. I was doing my first book in 1971. And I was doing the research, and I was researching for whatever reason, I forget, but the Lakeside Country Club where W.C. Fields was a member. And so they gave me their membership book, and sure enough, there's a guy whose name is Harold Bissonnette. No.
Wow.
So I call him up, and I'm thinking he belongs to a country club. He's got to be snotty. Now, I took French in college, but just in case. He's got to be snotty, so maybe that's where WC got the Bissonnette thing. And so I call up, and he goes, "Hello," and I go, "Hello, is this Mr. Bissonnette?" And he goes, "It's Bissonnette."
Oh God!
Oh, that's perfect.
There's such a sense of closure in it.
I know, isn't there?
Wow.
Now, Ronald, I don't want to put you too much on the spot here. Bob Lehman was apparently the actor playing WC in this scene we're talking about. Apparently, pretty well known as a WC Fields impersonator. But his only real roles on IMDb were in playing that persona. When you watch this minute, you see his performance. How would you rate it? Is he doing a decent job?
I would rate it A1. It's one of the best I've ever seen. It really is, even because he's subtle. Mostly the people who impersonate WC go overboard.
Right.
But this guy was subtle, and the some of the dialogue was not that great, but he had to say it. He did that. And his looks. He didn't do a huge double take, which most people do when they impersonate WC. He did the
right, sort of the shrug while his arm comes up and he steps back.
Yeah.
And in a very non-Disney moment, of course, we pan down to Jennifer Connelly's cleavage so he can give his line about being doubly charmed.
Right.
Which he did manage a certain in some of his post-code movies. He did manage to get things snuck in. I mean, if you watch some of his asides seem to be, I can imagine censors going, "Wait, what did he mean by that?"
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
Well, he had a wonderful vocabulary, didn't he? He was always a very intelligent man. And I don't know how
He was,
realistic this line here about a euphonious appellation, but he certainly was known for flowery language and things that would often sail right over the heads of anybody around him.
Sure.
Is it true? Is it true? I had read that he only had a grade school education, and a lot of times when he was traveling with Hattie, he carried trunks full of books, and he read things like Homer and Euripides and things like that to boost his knowledge.
And Dickens and Twain. He loved those guys. We have the whole collection, or had the whole collection at our house of their works. Yeah, he was just an incredible human being. He read this stuff, self-educated. He used to carry a dictionary and around with, not used to, when he was involved, well, he did, in fact, carry a dictionary with him, look up words. I found notes in his writing. He'd write down the words. Coincidentally, this is a talking about genetics. It's an odd thing. I still, to this day, have my grammar school dictionary. This is before I knew W.C. was my grandfather. And I did the exact same thing. I used to write down words and their definitions of words I had never heard before. So when W.C., in My Little Chickadee, W.C. turns to Mae West and says, "What's your name, dear?" And she goes, "Flower Bell Lee." And he goes, "What a euphonious appellation." Now,
wow.
Now we know, the three of us, we know there's probably 1% of the population who knows what those two words mean.
Exactly.
Yes. And it simply means a nice sounding name, but to put a euphonious appellation, incredible, And he didn't care.
Redeploying it in this movie.
Pardon me?
And they managed to redeploy that phrase in this particular scene.
I know. I saw that. I noticed that. Which is interesting because consider his arrogance, and there has to be a certain amount of arrogance. He is saying euphonious appellation, knowing no one's going to get it. Right. The words sound funny together. That's all he knows. There's a flow to it. So he loved words, and there's really no point in him saying that, but he says it anyway.
Right. Well, and she's obviously very charmed by it. I don't think we know what Jenny Blake's character's actual age is, but we can make an educated guess. And Jennifer Connelly, the actress at the time, was 19. Oh. And if W.C. was born in 1880, so his character, he'd be 58 in this role. So he's just coming up to a pretty girl and just couldn't care less. He's just gonna lay it all out there. And it's wonderful how charmed and how attentive she seems. Obviously, she's going to be starstruck in the scene. She's a struggling young actress who's just been in, sort of scenery roles. And now here's a legend here to keep her company while her date wanders off to do, top secret Nazi things. But, right. But just that the way she looks at him and everything else, so I have a feeling that there's a lot of truth to that he could probably just walk up to and insert himself into any conversation and charm just about anybody just by being himself.
Yes, and he had that certain charisma, where there was such, as I said earlier, he seemed so insecure in his youth. As he got older, I think he got very secure and just felt that he could do just about anything in any situation, and he had a very great self-confidence. So yeah, I think you're right. He had when he came into a room, he owned the room, that type of thing.
How true would you feel the Steiger movie W.C. Fields and Me was in portraying Fields? I know it's a tough question to ask in Family Matters.
No, it's not tough at all. It was Carlotta Monti's book, who was 24, and W.C. I think was around 54 when they hooked up. Her book was as inaccurate and unrevealing as any book. It just was all about her. It wasn't about W.C. What she does not reveal is that she met W.C. I think at 34. In 1936, she married an opera singer and moved to New York. When she came, she just mentioned that when she came back
it's a bit of an omission, yeah.
Yeah, I know. 2 years later, when she comes back to W.C., you can tell in the letters that they write between each other that this relationship that they had, which was probably very physical, undoubtedly very physical, had turned into almost father-daughter. W.C.'s writing letters, giving her advice. So her book was completely inaccurate. And the funny thing about the movie, it was not only completely inaccurate, it didn't even represent her book, which was completely inaccurate. So you got a double inaccurates there.
Wow.
So no, that book got nothing to do with reality. In fact, I was writing my play, and the fellow who produced that called up my producer and said, "Do you have any information we can have on WC?" And he says, "Well, I have his grandson right here. We're doing a play. You should talk to him." He says, "No, we have enough information," and hung up. So they weren't going after her.
Yeah, it wasn't a biography.
No.
It was,
no. And the incident in Mexico where he urinates over the speakers, that happened with another actor, and I forget his name, but that happened with another actor down in Mexico, and it's a true story.
I don't feel that Fields was his persona, but he used his persona when it helped him in social situations. I think. He gave his audience what they were asking for, but it seems like he was more of a private man, and as you said, he had insecurities early in his life that he tried to bolster by collecting so much and just kind of hoarding stuff.
Right. I co-wrote and co-produced a documentary on him, for which it was kind of neat. I won the Primetime Emmy Award, and it was called W.C. Fields Straight Up. And in it, there's only one scene in the whole thing that we have in the repertoire of our archives that shows him actually talking. And he turns in one scene, it's in his backyard, and it's a short clip that never was exposed to the light of day except after he passed away. And he did it for the USO. And he literally looks up he's sitting at a table where he has a drink, and he looks up and says to the director, "Do you want me to hold this over here or hold this over there?" Now, it's the same voice. Everything's the same, except it's not exaggerated as he talks when the camera's running. But it's the same sound, same cadence, So it was a character he created, but it's very close to his character.
He did manage to, from what I understand, in his early life, he had kind of a stage fright because of his stutter. He had like a stammering. I don't know if that affected just in that drawl that he used, if that kind of helped him get over the stutter, or I mean, if that could have been where it came from. Or
well, I interviewed Adele and Leroy. Those are Leroy's WC's younger brother, and Adele is his younger sister. And they said he didn't stutter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's just, I think that's one of those fictions that,
It told well, so people passed it along.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this has been an illuminating episode. I really, really appreciate you, Ron, for being on the show. This little piece, I mean, it's kind of a passing moment in this 109-minute movie, but it seems to be a great pause. It kind of highlights the other characters, especially Jenny's character, that she gets to be kind of starstruck by yet another of Hollywood's. He was kind of one of the Olympians of this time, and it's nice knowing that this part. I think that this part treated Fields with honor.
I agree, and what a fabulous movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, it did. It treated him well, and we were very happy about that.
Now, I assume that the Fields family retains the intellectual property of the character of W.C. Fields.
Yes,
so
right.
When people are using, did Disney approach you to say that we're going to use the character and talk to you about how they were going to do it at the time? Or?
I do not recall, but I vaguely recall. I do not recall fully, but I vaguely recall that we had the royalties for them using that right. That we had an agent that was on the scene, and they agreed to a royalty to use the rights of the image and likeness of W.C. Fields, which we hold dear, and that's part of our business. In fact, we're going to send you a bill next month.
Excellent.
Okay, Hal will cover that. Don't worry. He's
and my mailing address is 7. So
that's right, 7.
Go ahead and send it right there. Well, this is a great part of the whole South Seats Club setup. As they're walking in, there's a brief sort of cameo by somebody playing Clark Gable, but the W.C. Fields segment here just absolutely cements it. It puts us right in that time and place, and just as Jim, you were saying, it gives Jenny a little bit of character development. This is, she's in her element, but she's meeting, the best of the very best.
Yeah.
And it also kind of underlines Neville Sinclair's role in Hollywood, that he is the number 3 box office and Fields chides him by saying, "Did you fall off any chandeliers?"
That's a good line.
So you'd love to know the whole backstory there. And then I always get a kick out of it because it's so easy to forget that he's in it. There is a, blink and you'll miss him appearance by Clint Howard, Ron Howard's brother, who's been in almost everything, but he walks in and tells Neville that he's needed in the other room.
Wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I think that's his role in life, is just kind of he's almost like the Where's Waldo. It's like, oh look, it's Clint Howard.
Right.
That's right.
And unfortunately, I guess for him, we go straight from the sort of mortifying shot of Jenny's cleavage right to Clint Howard's face, and
right.
Maybe that's a palate cleanser. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, there's so many things going on in this particular minute. I mean, we usually when we're not talking about famous people that are in the scenes, we kind of do a rundown of this. But we've watched Neville goes off to talk to Eddie Valentine, the gangster / owner of the South Seas Club, right. Who's going to have a discussion with Neville about what happened to his boy Wilmer, who got kind of cut in half at the hospital.
Ooh.
But it was, this is kind of a grim moment where they're trying to figure out, it's kind of a power struggle as to who's in charge of finding the Rocketeer's rocket pack.
That was Sorvino, wasn't it?
Yes, that's Paul Sorvino right there.
The interesting thing about that is that whoever designed this script, and that I teach script writing, but whoever designed it did a very good job, because they made a funny moment with WC. My kids always make fun of me. Moment with WC right before the very dark scene.
And it
contrasts wonderfully.
It's that swinging back and forth and this constant power play of wheels within wheels,
right.
Where Jenny thinks she's about to make it big time with Neville. This big time Hollywood actor has noticed her and pulled her out of the chorus line and is now making her a major role in the movie.
And interesting historical note. That's what WC did with Hattie. She was in the Monte Carlo Girls, a chorus line, and he pulled her out and fell in love.
Wow.
I'd like to think there's an alternate version of this Rocketeer universe where when Neville comes back to the table, Jenny's gone and she's just gone home with WC. It just wouldn't surprise me at all.
I know.
Yeah. I do have to ask, how realistic was it that WC turned down the role of the Wizard of Oz? That's something I've always wondered about since I was a kid.
Same here. Big Oz fan, and I've always been curious about that very thing.
He was working on a different movie at the time.
No, here's what happened. He got discharged from Paramount. Universal Studios was going bankrupt. Bank of America says, if you don't sign W.C. Fields, you do not get a loan. So Universal was not going to loan the money unless they signed Fields on as one of their players. So they signed Fields. He's writing the movie. We go back to it. You can't cheat an honest man.
Yeah.
And so they go to the people from the Wizard of Oz. They go to WC and they said, we want you in this. Now, I'm going to tell you something interesting, of course, I think. They go to WC and WC says, no, I'm making my own movie. And so they say, well, you don't have to play the wizard. You can play the lion. You can play just about anything you want. Now, as a screenwriter, here's my take. If W.C. Fields was in the Wizard of Oz, I don't think it would have been this much of a classic. And the reason being is I think he would have dominated it too much.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, he needed to be more of a background character like Frank Morgan.
Like
Frank Morgan was
right.
Yeah, he was the second banana kind of.
Yeah, although he played 4, 5, or 6 different roles. Of course, Frank Morgan was everywhere in the film, but
he was always as the secondary character. Yes. I don't think Frank Morgan ever starred in anything.
No, absolutely.
Well, here's an interesting thing. In 1925, Jerome Kern and Ziegfeld sat down and wrote Showboat. They wrote Showboat for W.C. playing Captain Andy.
Wow.
Yeah, that's why they wrote it. It was a W.C. vehicle all the way. And what happened is he started getting involved with Paramount and making movies. The guy they got to replace WC, because the thing was done. WC was supposed to go, and at the last minute he pulled out. They got Frank Morgan to replace WC.
Oh, jeez.
It's just everywhere. So Frank Morgan is the poor man's W.C. Fields.
There you go.
So you can plug him in anywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
He was the Ted McGinley of his day.
Yes.
So we end this minute with Eddie being sarcastic, but Neville doesn't quite understand that he's being sarcastic. He's trying to be obsequious almost to saying everything's doing all right, but there's wheels within wheels of this Neville not realizing that he's about to get yelled at for killing one of Eddie's boys. So but we'll have to talk about that it's probably tomorrow. Actually, we're gonna wind up chatting about that. One thing I have to say is I do love the office door of Eddie Valentine, that beveled, almost fluted doorway that's plugged in there. We've been talking about architecture recently in the past couple of days, and it's just an amazing bit of carpentry.
And then in the background on the wall there's a beautiful print of an ocean liner with that sort of that palm trees and things, and I'm about 90% sure that's a liner from the P&O, the Peninsular and Oriental Navigation Company. So that would have been they were one of the few that were using that all white, even down to the waterline paint schemes at that time. Beautiful artwork and those popcorn clouds that I just love.
Yeah, and we still have never been able to find out who the mermaid is in the background, but I just wondered what her shift was like.
Yes, exactly.
Did you get a 2-hour break?
It very well could have been sunken. So.
Right. Yeah. Yes. And that's no small thing to build a tank like that for this set for just a bit of set dressing.
That's a lot of water.
It is a lot of water just for for a bit of backdrop in this scene.
Yeah, it must have just been interesting just to call action.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, mermaid, swim.
Yeah, swim.
Mer.
Well, this has been a fantastic episode here, and Ron, thank you.
If I can add one thing at the end here. Here's two things that may excite you. I've written the libretto, and we're working on the lyrics and the composition for a Broadway musical, which I'm calling An Honest Man, based on W.C. Fields' life.
Oh, that's
wow. Okay. Well, hold off on the Great American Novel and concentrate on that, because I would want to go to see that.
I know. And then I'm working on a kids show that is you guys are Wizard of the Oz fellows. It is very similar to the Wizard of Oz. It's called the Magic Paint Box. They go in this paint box. These kids find the paint box, and then we go into Insperia, which is a world that's completely like Oz, all color, everything else. And the mayor of the town of Insperia is W.C. Fields. W.C. Fields' character.
Oh, that's a
type character, yes.
Yeah, so I hope by doing this I can introduce a new generation to him. When I wrote before this play, the newspapers would always say, and we have the great W.C. Fields lines, and they'd quote one or two of his and one or two of mine. So I think I have some of his, in terms of writing, some of his way of speaking and his lines down. So we hope to get those out soon.
Oh, that sounds terrific. Wow. Well,
could you name off the books that you've written about Fields? Because I know these are available on Amazon, but I'd just like our listeners to know what to look for when they're searching under Ronald Fields on Amazon.
Well, they search under Ronald J. Fields. And the reason why I say that is because when I started my career, there was a very famous choreographer called Ron Field, and I put the newspaper. They said Ron Field opens a new play on Broadway, and I put it in front of my mother-in-law, and she goes, "Ron, do you have a play on Broadway?"
Whoops!
I said I better go by Ronald J. So that's the best way. It's there are four things that may be of interest to your audience, and one is W.C. Fields by himself, just re-released late last year, with a foreword by Conan O'Brien, who called W.C. Fields the funniest person who ever lived in the foreword. We have W.C. Fields' A Life on Film, which is my favorite book. Right after that, I wrote the documentary for which I won a Primetime Emmy, and that was called W.C. Fields Straight Up. And then in 2000s, I wrote Never Give a Sucker an Even Break, W.C. Fields on Business.
Well, we're sure glad you gave a couple of suckers here an even break and coming on the show.
You guys have been great. Hal, Jim, it's just been a pleasure for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for being on. For folks who'd like to continue the conversation, of course, we're always available on a bunch of different social media. You can find us on Twitter at Rocketeer Minute. You can find us on Facebook. If you go to facebook.com/Rocketeer Minute, we're always there at the Rocketeers Bulldog Cafe. Find us on the big site, RocketeerMinute.com, where we will have, we're going to have a link to Ron's Amazon listings. We'll put that in on this particular episode page, so check that out. You can also go listen to previous episodes, talk with other people that are also listening to our show, and catch up on a whole bunch of cool swag that you can pick up there in the store section. Also, please, if you are listening to us and you're almost an hour into this, you really should go and subscribe on either iTunes or Google Play. Just search for Rocketeer Minute. When we come up, just click the subscribe button. You'll get every new episode Monday through Friday delivered hot and fresh. So please join us online, or join us here tomorrow when we find out what's going on with Neville and Eddie, and what they're going to do about that girl that's talking to W.C. Fields out in the middle of the South Seas Club. So join us here tomorrow, here on the Rocketeer Minute. Until then, over and out.